Here we are. So, sorry for the little hiccups at the start. So, hello and welcome to the Vue Meetup Online. My name is Simone and I'm a senior engineer at Digital Labs. So, today our sponsor is Digital Labs and your partner in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organization. You can find out more on our site, digitallabs.com. A couple of announcements before we start. We do framework-specific meetups each month for React, Angular, and Vue. And our next event are going to be on the 6th of February for Angular Online, 13th of February for React Online, and 20th of February for Vue Online. So keep tuned and check our website and reserve your seat for that. Today's speakers are going to be Maria Lamardo and Jessica Sachs. As you can see them ready online to actually start. And today's talk is going to be as follows. So we're going to have a little introduction as we're doing it now. Maria is going to start with a talk on focus management with Vue.JS. And then Jessica is going to have her own talk from 4 p.m. to 4:20 p.m. on self-documenting component with Vue Styleguidist. At the very end, there will be some questions. So if you have any questions, please write them on the chat. I will be taking all the questions. And when the talk is finished, the speakers will have a couple of minutes to answer the question if there is time left. So before, without waiting any time, we're going to go and give the show to Maria and please take ownership. I'll pass it over. Okay. And I'm going to unmute yourself.
Awesome, thanks. It also looks like I need you to stop sharing so I could share. All right, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Maria Lamardo. I am a front-end engineer at Pendo. I'm instructor at Vue School, so if you guys want to check out more about accessibility, I do have a course at Vue School. I work a lot with Vue Vixens, and I also run a lot of meetup groups in the area. And I am a board certified assistant behavior analyst, which is where my interest on web accessibility comes from. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. I have created this application to show you guys what I'll be talking about today. And it is a very simple application that lists out a couple of tasks that you can do, and you can delete items from your list, and you could add new items to your list. So new item and description. You could see that I use my keyboard to navigate some of that. So if I press tab, you can see that I can navigate and delete some things. We have a message that displays once the list is empty. I could again navigate here. So I'm doing this all through my keyboard, so it seems like it's pretty accessible. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my screen reader so you guys see what this sounds like, and I'll refresh application.
Voiceover on Chrome. Focus _ sim audio submenu is labs in Chrome. Focus delete dry cleaning button list tasks 3 items. Delete dog food button. Delete bills button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control Option space. Delete dog food button list tasks 2 items. You are currently on a list inside of web. Delete dry cleaning button. You are currently on a group inside of web content. Add new favorite button. You are currently on a voiceover off.
So as you guys can see, the application does have some ability to read exactly what's on the screen, but there's a couple of issues. You can see that as I open up this modal, my focus is actually, it remained on the button which opened the modal. You can also see that as I deleted the items, my focus got kind of lost, especially when I deleted this last one, it kind of remained there, which is a little bit weird. And you can kind of see this with this other tool that I have that will keep track of where your focus is. So you can see that it's lost somewhere in the body. So let's take a look at the code and see what are a couple of things that we can do to fix this. So I'm gonna go ahead and, oops, sorry, just struggling with the Zoom tools. So I'll check out step number 2, where I have added an announcement. Right here. So I've hidden this from Vue, so you cannot see it, but it will tell the screen reader what's happening as this gets updated. And I've used a role of status, which will pretty much act as an ARIA live and will announce it to the screen reader. And the way that that's being updated, so you could see here that I have, this is the Vuex store. You can see that I have this announce, which is empty. And then we're updating that announce every time that we either delete a task or we add a task. So every time we update it and say the name of the task that has been added or deleted. And we're also returning the focus as we add new tasks. We're going to move focus into the page title, same as when we delete tasks. So let's see what's happening here. So I'm going to turn on my screen reader.
Voiceover on Chrome. Delete dry clean button list task heading level 1. Tasks. Dry cleaning has been deleted. Delete bills button. Your heading level 1. Tasks. Bills has been deleted. Leaving web content. Delete dog heading level 1. Tasks. Looks like you completed all dog food has been deleted. Add new favorite button. Candidate list. S. Cancel. Add button. Tyler Wilson has joined the meeting. Leaving web content. Create new tab heading level 1. Tasks. New task has been added. You are current. Voiceover off.
So as you guys can see, we were able to hear as tasks were deleted and as tasks were added, and it kind of kept leading us back to the task header. A couple of things, we're still kind of losing focus when we're opening up this modal, and we don't necessarily always want to keep going back to the header. Let's take a look at how that looks in the code though. So the reason why I'm able to target the header is because I've gone in here and I have given it a tab index of -1. Now what this will do is it will kind of bring it in the order of, it will add it to the tabbable elements that are available, but it's not going to be in the order of the DOMs. So the only way to access this is through methods. So doing something like this where we can target that ID and then focus on it. And I'm only able to do that because I added a tab index of -1. And I do want to show you guys what happens if you add things like tab index of 0 or 1, or it happens if you go higher than 1, 2, 3. And I will add buttons in the middle so you guys can see what happens. So things that are tabbable semantically are things like buttons or any input fields or links. So like you probably notice, like as you're tabbing through a page, you're tabbing through links and buttons and any action items available, but your computer is ignoring anything like headers or paragraphs or any divs available. So let's take a look at how these get altered by adding tab indexes. So you can see that, and I'll actually do something like this. So this one had a 0, this had a 1, 2, and 3. That way we are clear of where we are. And then I'll turn this on again. I love this tool. You should definitely install this. So I'm going to tab, and you could see that it tabbed first at the one that I had tab index of 0. And then it's gonna go to the button. So it's kind of going in the order of the DOM first. And then actually, I'll refresh because I think I touched it. Okay, yeah, so it's gonna go first to the first one, then second, then third, and then it's gonna go back to the DOM and go through the order of the DOM. And you could see that it didn't touch the -1. That will only get touched when you call it through a method. And I will answer any questions that you guys might have on that after. So yes, so now let's go to the next step. Where we're going to be talking about how to call focus into that modal as we open it. So again, remember our focus was staying back here, but now you could see, well, I'll turn on screen reader so you guys can see.
Add new favorite button. You are on slide 1 of 2. Simone, Cuomo, system voiceover on.
Sorry, it's reading everything that's happening in Zoom. So you guys could see that it kind of brought focus into this create task title. And let's talk about how that happened. So in the modal component, and don't worry so much about the code, only the things I'm pointing out, I have added a directive here. So this is pretty much calling focus into this element as soon as it is inserted into the page. And that element will be here. So this is where we're calling that directive. And because it is not an element that is semantically tabbable, I'm also adding this tab index of -1 so I can focus on it by methods. So let's take a look. So you guys saw that it automatically targeted the header. And again, this handy tool will show you that right now I'm on the header for new tasks, and then task notes. And then if I go back, that's a problem, right? I can still kind of interact with things behind the modal, which is not something that we really want users to do, because that's not something that someone can do with their mouse. So like as soon as I click out, you could see that it kind of closes it. So let's see how we can change that. So let's go to our next step. And then in this one, I'll stay in the code for a little bit. So before I used to just have the input fields in this divs. And now I have added this new divs that are hidden from Vue. So you guys could see that nothing has really changed in the modal. But what it's doing, it's acting as focus guards. And it's saying every time that you tab into this, so pretty much tabbing backwards from name, you're going to go ahead and focus on last. And pretty much this has a tab index of zero, which calls it into focus in the order of the DOM. So every time you click here, it's going to lead you back to the last item on the page, which is like this ref here. And then every time you hit this last focus guard, it's going to lead you to the first, which is going to be, I believe, this up here, which is the ref first. And you could see that happening in my methods right here. So every time I focus on the div that says focus on first, it's going to find that ref with the first ref. And then same thing for the last. So let's check that out on our application. So here we have this, and I'm just going to keep, you see, tabbing, and I'm kind of stuck inside here. I can, of course, click escape or cancel. So you could see that we've created a focus trap inside this modal, so the users cannot interact with things that are outside of that modal. And I found this focus guards useful because before I was doing this, I was targeting like if a user focuses like here and then tabs, depending on how they tab, if they shift tab, then you have to go back into the order down here. And then the same thing for this, if they tabbed but not shift tab, then they have to go up here. But then it was kind of targeting the elements behind very briefly as it made that switch. So this solved that problem. And if you guys want to test it out, please do. And then if you're using a screen reader, it will catch it sometimes, but I would really recommend this Nerd Focus extension, which will catch it every time, as it really catches every single instance of focus, even if it's very brief. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about is how we validate these errors. So for example, if I have this, I don't really want empty things being able to be added into this list, which we are allowing now. So let's take a look at how we can fix that. So in here, this was very simple. I have added Vue.JS. So those of you who haven't used it before, you pretty much give a rule of validations here, and then you pretty much match the name of the data attribute that you want to target, and then you give it any rules that you might want. So right now, I wanted to have a required and a min length. So that's what I imported from the validators for Vue.JS. And this is how I target each of those attributes to have that. So every time that I'm validating for form name, it is required, and it has to have a minimum length of 2. So let's take a look at that. So not only were we able to do that, but now it's telling me, you see how it brought focus back to it? Say that I had two characters there, but not on the second one. And now I'm calling focus back again to that one. And the way that that's happening, let's see. So I've created this submission method where if so I'm going through the keys of the validators for Vue. And every time there is any error, we're going to focus on the ref that has the key of the piece that had the error. So you could see that when they both have an error, it's going to go to the first one first. And when the first one is satisfied, then it's going to go to the second one. And once they both have enough characters, then it's going to be submitted. And you could see that the focus is back on the button in case I want to continue to add new tasks. Ooh, if I can spell it, new task with notes. And you could see that it just keeps doing that. I've also added this exit button here, so users can exit it that way as well. Cool. So that is my presentation. I did want to make this quick to make sure that we had a chance to go over all of it. So I can either answer questions now, I think I have a couple of minutes, or we could leave them to the end. Oh, also, if you guys want to check out this project, there is a link for it for my GitHub account. Feel free to download it, make pull requests for it if you want to make a change. All right, so let's see. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I'm reading some of the comments, seeing if anybody had any questions.
Sorry, Maria, I could not unmute myself until I took control of the
screen.
Of the Zoom. So guys, if you have any question, if you don't mind just to write them in the chat, and I will happily read it out for Maria. So one of the questions was from Brandon. He was asking if it was just the main, was the normal CLI, or did you use anything such as Nuxt or anything else for?
No, so I used CLI 3 to build the project, and I added the store. I don't believe I have the router or anything like that. Yeah, just the store.
Nice and simple.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Vue.JS, of course.
Do you use, which one did you say was it, Vue.JS?
Yes, Vue.JS.
Do you, is that your NPM, is that your package of choice for validation?
Yes, and I actually have a talk comparing Vue.JS with vValidate. If you guys are interested, I know Vue Mastery just released it on their platform.
Oh, fantastic! They'll probably, you know, send the link and probably try to add it to the show notes later on.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Good, good. So, any more questions? No. Thank you so much, Maria. The accessibility topic is really, really important. People sometimes forget, and it's great to see talks like this because it's, you know, it really supports people in making better apps. So thank you so much for your talk. And we are now ready to move on our second talk. So, and that's going to be from Jessica. So Jessica, I'm going to unmute yourself. Sorry, I'm going to unmute you. Let's see if I can.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello,
So,
hello.
hello.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get into it. Great. Share, desktop 1, ready to go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. All right, let's do it. So let's go full screen and start presenting. So, all right. So hi, my name is Jessica. I am a tech lead at a company called Intent. We're based out of New York. I'm actually visiting New York right now. Work remotely out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, usually. So Today we're going to be talking about self-documenting components with Vue Styleguidist. I'm going to try to go pretty slowly and talk about style guides in general, and then I'll dig into the tool a little bit more. So Vue Styleguidist is actually it's a copy of React Styleguidist. It was initially forked straight from React Styleguidist without any changes. So in the early days, it was straight React, and it would render your Vue components. So there's a lot of history behind it, and I'm really excited about this tool. This tool is what sold Vue to my company, to the business people. It was the big needle mover for us to get off of jQuery. So it means a lot to me, and I think it's very powerful as far as productivity goes. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover the core features, and then some different ways that you can use Styleguidist, because it's very powerful and very general, so you can try to use it in different ways. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. And then we'll talk about some advanced features and maybe what we're going to be doing in the future, leveraging the underlying packages that Styleguidist is made up of. Cool. So first thing I'm going to start off with is a live demo. So what Styleguidist does, if you give it a directory of components, is it will statically analyze your components and build documentation from them. So with only writing a comment above a property, you will get your prop name, its type. You should be using type for props. But if you do, you'll get its type, and then you'll get the content of the comment. And this is super cool because it is live documentation in that your docs don't get out of date. You know, your code becomes the documentation. So it does all this static analysis. It gives you slots, events, methods, and props. And then it also renders your components. And so everybody uses a button because everybody gets buttons. But you can imagine how in a more complex component, like let's say a file tree or a carousel kind of component, it would be really useful to play with it and send it over to maybe designers or product managers while you're building it. And this is a different kind of workflow than most people are used to, because what I end up doing a lot of times is I end up sending URL links to Vue Styleguidist to maybe product managers as I'm building individual components. And this is very powerful because I don't wait until I push to staging to send entire home pages or list pages of a website. I send them individual pieces and I say, hey, do you like this interaction? And that's the way that I use Styleguidist at work. And this is done really well for me. You can obviously see that it live updates. This is super powerful. It takes both JSX and Vue. So if you have a component called best button, either in the file name or the name property of the component, then you can reference it in this live coding section. But you can also just write, like you're in Code Sandbox, individual templates like this. And it will render. It'll take script tags and it'll take style tags. It's super powerful in that regard. It'll compile error if you give it random stuff it doesn't like. So very resilient. And there's many examples on the Vue Styleguidist documentation of how to use it with everything from Sass loaders to Laravel, Vue CLI, Nuxt, Vuex, and the simple basic example that I just showed you. This is extremely, extremely powerful when you're trying to figure out how to integrate a style guide into an existing code base, which is possible, I promise. So at its core, Styleguidist is a static analysis tool for generating documentation. It looks at your comments, your templates, and some other information of your components to determine what the output of the web page that you just saw should be. So input is source code, and then output is a website, basically. The other thing it does is so that it can render that website, it needs to understand your components dependency tree. That means that it needs to be able to import your source code as well as your website does. So if you're importing a file, like a utility file that's internal, it must be able to do the same to render your component. It also does live hot reloading. So if I were to change the code on my end, it would auto update my style guide. And I demonstrated the live code samples when I was writing that Vue template inside of the live example block. So this is extremely powerful. Like, you have this meta tool to inspect your components at a different level. You get to see what you get to see what types everything is, you get to see what slots there are, and you get a full index of your components that you use in production in a workshop kind of a space. And Styleguidist, when you go to its homepage, it bills itself as both an isolated development environment and a living style guide. I'll explain what those are in a minute. But you can also use them in other ways. I've been using Styleguidist for over a year now, probably a year and a half, in production across 3 front-end teams, and it is what has made Vue adoptable for all of our front-end teams. We mainly use it in the isolated development environment capacity. So an isolated dev environment means that instead of, when you get mocks from a designer, instead of going straight to running your website in localhost 8080 and trying to build your components on top of, let's say, a homepage, you go to Styleguidist instead. So you'll start your Styleguidist server up, and you'll go straight back to that, that base button example here, and you'll try to iterate on building your header right here in this little sandbox. It even gives you a focus mode so that the only thing on the page is the component you're working on. And that keeps you on track when you're trying to think of how to build APIs that are modular and aren't specific to the page that the designer thought it was supposed to be for. Cool. So again, imagine that you have to build this website, and you have a requirement that you should be able to swap in any image or creative for this Web Studio logo, this guy. Instead of going and creating the whole page first and putting the header on top, maybe you would start in a Styleguidist instance, and you would write a header component with a well thought out API with a slot for the logo, and maybe a color for the hamburger menu so that you could toggle between dark mode and light mode. You can really think of things modularly and make good decisions when you're very focused. So that concept is called style guide driven development. I know everything is driven development nowadays, like test driven. And Sarah Vieira has a lot of, I should really spell out her name, but if you Google for her, Sarah Vieira in the React community has a lot of talks about style guide driven development and how it can be useful. You can find it on YouTube. So the second way of using Styleguidist is as a living style guide. And in the first way, as an isolated development environment, your audience is really other developers. You guys are thinking about how can you build stuff modularly, and how can you focus on creating good APIs. you're not focused on making one web page that communicates the story of your website's style, like a style guide does. So in a living style guide, things are a little bit different. For us, at my job, what we're aiming for is having a living style guide for designers to communicate the style of our products. If you look at Material Design or Carbon by IBM, those are living style guides. They tell a story about the colors, the margins, the accessibility guidelines that you should be following. And it's the same tool, right? So Styleguidist is the same tool that can be used for very different purposes. So originally, when we started to create a style guide at my job, we started making it design only. And so they would go on a CMS, a content management system, and they would write in Markdown what they thought a button would be. And then they would go into Photoshop, and then they would assign 3 sizes of buttons: small, medium, and large. You know, I'm just going to show you the buttons. So they would go and they would make these buttons, and they would be small, medium, and large. And then these are images, right? And so then they would decide that they would like to update the specs on this button. And a designer would go in and they would have to tweak the everything, right? If you change the font sizes, if you decide to use EMs instead of pixels, so much manual work to keep this up to date. And so what a living style guide is that it's always up to date, and that it's much, much, much better than Photoshop because it's so much less work for a designer to keep up. And that's another one of the ways that you can use Styleguidist. The third is going to be as developer documentation. Again, your audience shifts. You're not looking to make a cohesive story out of your components. You're just looking to index them all and make them searchable and have a live rendered output. For stuff like this, my style guide would contain lots of edge cases, things that aren't pretty. Oftentimes we test out the longest string that we have in our system, in our I18N system for translations, and we see if it fails on a button or a more complex UI component. So this will be like, I don't know, Gaelic, or I think Gaelic is the longest, one of the most verbose languages as far as character content. And so we have a special language called longest strings that we select in Styleguidist, and it turns all of our components, that's like a few hundred components, and it re-renders them all with their longest, ugliest format in whatever language that is. And that really stress tests everything and lets us quickly check if we're gonna break stuff. Same thing for right to left. We switch it to Hebrew, or, and then we close like the language picker, and then everything re-renders as right to left. And you get to check if you broke something by using a margin left or a margin right or another sided kind of style. Super great tool for making sure you're not breaking your irregular paths that you wouldn't normally check. The last thing that you can use Styleguidist for is your snapshot testing. My team, across all 3 of our developer teams, it's a little difficult to get everybody on the same page as to what our best practices are. And writing more unit tests is a hard sell for me to do. So what you get for free with a style guide is exercising all of your different components, especially if you're using it in that ugly way where you're trying to render all the edge cases. You can easily point a snapshot testing tool, usually in Jest, at the disted built version of that style guide. You kind of get a productivity hack because your style guide becomes your snapshot tests. Huge time saver. So far, you've seen a website to view your components with documentation and live previews of your components. And this is the part that sold Styleguidist for me, apart from other tools like Storybook, is that I mentioned that it's hard to get 3 teams to write lots of unit tests, and it is. So when we decided to adopt Styleguidist, the big thing for me was that you didn't have to write a lot of code. For Storybook, let's tab over to it, Storybook. Let's look at React. And to get a story built, for anybody who doesn't know, let's see if we can pull it up. Quick start guide for Vue. To get a basic story pulled up, you end up having to write a lot of unit tests known as stories. They're not unit tests, they're called stories, but they feel very, very unit test-y. And they're just another thing that you have to convince people to write. And I found that to be a barrier to entry in getting my team to use it. So what's actually involved in the code for all this stuff? Like, it can't be pure magic, but it's not, it's static analysis. So what that means is that when you write a component like a base button that might have a prop and some computeds and some methods, if you have something like a color with a string and a default and a block comment, this is JS doc style comments, it will render that out just like this, like we saw. And that's all there is to it. That's literally all there is to it. Examples of, this is actually pretty sweet. In Vue, we have this concept of keeping similar, most things that you touch frequently together. So templates and scripts and styles usually live in one single file component. And so Vue Styleguidist also has a custom docs block that it interpolates. So if you're one of the people who likes having your styles and your templates and script together, you can also have your documentation together. It supports both JSX, like you can see on lines 5 through 7, as well as full-blown Vue templates. And it supports Markdown outside of those code fences. If you like having your files separate, it takes a README sibling to that Vue component by default. So you can still put your documentation elsewhere if that's what floats your boat. So my other favorite feature about the documentation is being able to document your slots. This is great when you're trying to do multiple named slots. In the basic case, you just put an HTML style comment above your slot in your template. So this would be the button that we've seen earlier in our examples. And it would render out just like this. It would say it's a default slot because it's not named. And then the description would be whatever you put in the HTML style comment. This is really useful when you're building really complex placements. So for example, at work, we have a Parallax placement that we built ourselves. Most Parallax placements only work with background images, or most Parallax components mostly work with background images. And we needed to put some content that was inside of, let's say, an iframe or just a div, and we wanted to parallax that div. Couldn't find it anywhere on the internet, so we had to build it from scratch. This parallax component takes a lot of things, but if you look down at the slots, it takes a fixed header and a fixed footer and some default content for what should have the parallax effect applied to it. And you know the way slots are, it could be any kind of component. You could put images inside of it, you can put an iframe, we don't really care. But when I tried to explain this very complex component and share it with the rest of my other 8 developers that I work with, having this documentation was super helpful and allowed another team to reuse it and adopt it quickly. So what we've learned is that all that Styleguidist is a way to generate docs from components. It generates a dependency tree using Webpack, and it has hot module reloading and the ability to compile live code samples, which is what I demonstrated in the beginning of the talk. And here's where we get a little more advanced, is what if you wanted to build your own showcase or website? What if you didn't like the way that Styleguidist was rendering out the props, the events, and the slots? So that's when we get to Vue DocGen. And this is the API that powers Styleguidist and actually Storybooks, docs add-on for Vue. They both use Vue DocGen. And the future looks like harnessing Vue DocGen with Nuxt and a CMS to empower your designers to build documentations with real Vue components. Again, flashing back to the buttons example, the goal is that your designers can write this documentation in Markdown and then link to real Vue components, not images. And designers don't use Git, so putting it in a CMS is kind of key. So the last bit we have here is for you to do on your own. If you wanted to get started with Styleguidist with 0 config, using Vue CLI, you can create a Vue Styleguidist demo app that looks very similar to the one we've been reviewing with a preset. This command is available under Vue Styleguidist /preset in GitHub, or I'll be sharing the slides afterwards. And that'll get you up and running to start playing around and seeing what's possible with auto-generating documentation for your components. Learning more, you can join the VueLand Discord on the Styleguidist channel, or you can watch Bart at VueConf US in March. He'll be giving a presentation on Vue Styleguidist, hopefully with the work that we're doing on Nuxt and Ghost CMS. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great talk. Anyone has any question, guys? If you do, as before, just write them in the chat. While we wait, I may have a question for you. How complicated it is to add Styleguidist on an existing project?
It depends on how complex your Webpack config is. There's a setting called dangerously update Webpack config that I make extensive use of. But generally, if you just require the resolved Webpack config inside of Vue CLI, it's kind of like an advanced users Webpack thing, but you probably know it. So if you do that, then you can start overriding some settings that you need to. But if you're just doing a basic website, you shouldn't have too much trouble.
Fantastic. That's great. Oh, does he work? A question from Daniel. Does he work for Rollup or just Webpack?
I have no idea, but if you ping Bart in Styleguidist, you will get an answer very, very quickly. He's very active. I think maybe somebody's working on it actively, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's important also to say that with this kind of open source, if you are interested in something, show your interest so people know and they can focus their priorities accordingly.
Actually, Bart is the person who got me into open source.
Oh,
yeah,
that's fantastic.
Right, recording
open source is the key.
Yeah.
So I've copied. I found the video from Sarah, and I pasted in there. And I'm making sure that it's also going to be on the notes, on the video notes, guys. And if no one else has any question, I would like to thank everyone for coming around. Thank you for joining. The video recording of the session is going to be out soon. And thank you again, Maria. Thank you, Jessica. It's been a pleasure to have you both around. Apologies for the little technical difficulties playing around with the UI. But other than that, thank you, and everyone a lovely day, and I'll see you next month for the next meetup.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye.